Hi, welcome at Octo Talks, the podcast where we'll talk about the latest, the greatest, and the finest in AI. We will cover a lot of topics about the latest innovations concerning AI, and today I invited Patrick Debois to talk about a very recent topic, agents. Welcome, Patrick.
Well, thanks for having me, Jens. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I'm glad I could kick off the series.
Yeah, I'm very happy to have you here because I read about you. You were the godfather of DevOps in Belgium. Wow, that's great.
It's a funny title. You know, people, when you think about the movie The Godfather, they think you control everything. That was not the case. So I'm like the benevolent helper. And the story is in 2009, I actually, organized the first DevOps Days event, and I didn't know it was a thing, but that's kind of how the world got to know the word DevOps.
Exactly. And maybe also how they got to know agents, because that's the topic of today. We hear about AI agents, large language models that can interact with the environment. They have memory, they have tools. They are the new big thing, right? So that's the topic of today for me, and I really am curious about your view on AI agents as well. And maybe to kick off, the question that I have is, we are building a lot of agents today. A lot of applications are built with agents using LLMs. They interact with the environment. But my question is, what are we building today, and will it be valuable tomorrow, Patrick?
That's a good question. I guess there's been a rush on AI and on Gen AI in particular. And so it has opened up possibilities with text, summarizing, making sure it writes our emails, all the things that it can help us with. A lot of companies are still also struggling to find their use case for this, and they're investing in the field. And it only makes sense because it's new technology, and you sometimes, I would call, you have to work the problem to see if there's something there, right? So I think the field is now about a year and a half, not mature, but far. We've come from, hey, let's do the LLM. Oh, let's add on some RAG, right? And then the talk of the town is now evals to get it maybe more robust, and then indeed agents, right? So I think not a lot of people are actually at the agents point. They think of it maybe as the co-pilot that answers some questions using the RAG, but then taking it a step further, having it do things on our behalf, that's still the tricky question. But I learned one thing, and you've been longer in AI than me, right? But if there's a problem with AI, we solve it with more AI. That's basically what a lot of people that we're doing. Yeah. So that's why people put their trust in agents as the next thing. An older model with agents gives better results. An older pipeline with RAG with agents give better results. So people have their hopes up that it will eventually improve up to a point that we're automated.
Exactly. They call it the agentic workflow, right? I was also curious from that angle. I also saw on your GitHub profile that you were working with agents in a DevSecOps setting, let's say. What is your experience there? Is it useful and will it be useful tomorrow? Is it just like a toy today?
I think there's a use. My experiment that you're referring to was actually, what if we get the three experts in the room? One agent is the dev expert, one is the ops, and one is the security. I use this to explain to people how agents work under the hood. They use kind of the reasoning, the act kind of pattern. And what I saw happening in most of the examples was actually, the dev kind of creates like a simple script. Then the ops person comes in and the agent says, let me improve this. Did you think about kind of adding that the directory is not readable? And so the whole script got more complicated. And then the other expert came in, the security says, we should check that it's root. And so eventually it blew up, right? Most of the exercises kind of spin out of control. And that's, the first experience people have is it's running, but we can't really control the output too well. There's a new kind of, direction people are taking is that instead of just saying, hey, do something, and I just give you the end goal and start planning, we're helping the agent now with what steps it's supposed to take. So we're helping them with a more like a predefined workflow. Well, first you should create the script, then you should criticize the script, then you should go to the next phase. So that kind of organizing a workflow around this is kind of where people are heading to kind of keep the creativity of these tools kind of in check.
That's still a topic, right? That I also see online, the chain of thought and how we can control that. We need to feed it with, this is how you need to think. I think I'm hoping for the fact that it will, at the end, will be able to think itself.
Right, yeah.
They say it will be autonomous, it will be proactive, it will be able to go into maybe like a super intelligence, who knows? But maybe to get into, we touched upon the value topic, what I see as well is a lot of investments has been made already in hardware. Everyone has seen NVIDIA stocks, everyone wanted to have NVIDIA stock at least. They're building massive amount of GPUs, but the question is, the 200 billion investment that they are making today, when will we get it back? Who will earn it back and how will we do it?
Yeah. I think that is an interesting finding the balance in how much you're saving versus how much you're spending, right? I heard story about, refactoring one file in a code base that costs like $20 internally to a company, right? That's expensive, for sure. But on the other hand, I don't want people to, optimize only for cost, right? So cost will go down. There's a few initiatives like that. The Mozilla has one, don't use a GPU, go on CPU, so they're stretching the boundaries, kind of reusing a lot of the existing hardware in there. We start seeing like virtualization of hardware, where you use like VLLM to host multiple models on the same GPUs. So there's a cost reduction there as well. So you see kind of then the economies of scale are making sure that kind of the costs go down. So I would not, yes, it's a large sum of money, and you always have to keep it in check with what the value is your customers are willing to pay. I'm deliberately not saying what it's worth. It's like what they're willing to pay. But the costs are only going down right now in a good way.
That's a good thing, right? What I also read is that, let's say, the 200 billion investment that is made in hardware, give or take the big players, OpenAI, Microsoft, they are taking 100 billion. They are, let's say, putting 100 billion revenue on the flip side. There's still like a big gap. Do you think that will be a huge opportunity for those players as well to expand their revenue in Gen AI, or do you assume that new players will come, startups with agentic workflow topics maybe?
Yeah, I think if you look at the typical evolution of a technology, it's rarely that the base is actually be the one that will keep all the money eventually. So over time, they kind of, they're flattened. They'll be challenged. That's what we see with, there's multiple models right now. There's multiple open source models. So they will get like a lot of pressure. Maybe they can keep up and they do extraordinary things. But that kind of, it's always diminishing. It's the ones who put the value closer to the end user who kind of are able to actually charge for this. And I think that's a constant, and I would see this evolve now as well. Of course, if they would step into the game of doing it all themselves, but then you don't create a good ecosystem. So it's a thin line between kind of, overruling the market or just, selling more shovels to the people who are digging for the gold. And sometimes that's the most effective way to get money in the short time.
Now, you see also those players are like, indeed, like you mentioned, they're balancing between should they provide the shovels or should they provide as well the spades, let's say, to have the gold. Some of them are creating more and more offerings for the customers themselves. Others are like more, we will just stick to, let's say, providing the hardware and the layer on top of it. Question that I have as well is, we talked about the business value of Gen AI, but also mainly from agents. We talked about the big gap of revenue that can be made. I recently also read about having agents being strong on the knowledge side. We had, for a very long time, we had SaaS offerings, products that actually cover, let's say, a process. They're getting closer to each other, right? You have those agents are able to know more. They get into the knowledge market, into the labor market. Those SaaS platforms are providing an offering in that space. So you see that labor and SaaS are getting together. And maybe even some say that the acronym SaaS is not anymore software as a service, but more service as a software. Mm-hmm. How do you look at that in this context?
So I would tell you the story. Imagine you're Amazon and you're providing your cloud infrastructure to everybody, right? And you can do that through an API, and they just kind of use whatever is there. For those familiar with team topologies, that's just like X as a service, and you're using it, right? So you could think, in the old days, we had people rack and stack the servers, and now you're just somebody's doing this especially for you. You don't have to worry about the cooling, the data center. So they took that away, and what you saw happening is that is not enough. Like Amazon is not just about providing you that service. You're actually paying a support contract to be able to talk to somebody who sets the right direction, who's there to help you with the problems they have, to architect your right things. And so the balance of we're just going to abstract everything away is not the solution, because we know things will fail. You want to pay for that failure, for that support, for influencing the roadmap. So that balance will stay. Does that mean some jobs will not go away? Of course, right? The rack and stacker, as we know, is only getting reduced by the people who are building the abstractions, and that will be similar here. And some, when we used to talk about VLANs, right? Now we don't talk about that. It's like VPC. So rewiring our existing things that we do is what we're looking for. And people who will not be able to adapt to any of the new ways of thinking, they might have a hard time indeed finding a job. But it's tempting to say that I can just hire labor through an API, and sometimes that's exactly what it does. But there's the building of trust, and why you're buying, why you're doing the support, that actually counters that intuitive motion of saving cost.
Yeah, well, that's actually a good thing that you mentioned. You talk about trust. Before I get into that topic into details, I totally agree what you're saying. And what I see the most is in the industries where you have very process-heavy operations. There you do see that a lot of questions arise to like, how can I make it more efficient? So today, agents are more in the efficiency sphere, let's say. Correct. Help me being more productive, help me to become more productive in the end, because we can see the value today of what they can do. Imagine what they will be able to do tomorrow as well. But still, in that same conversation, we always have the question, trust. Mm-hmm. How can we build up trust? Because back in the days, we had our code, the classical software, so to speak. We had the code, and if something was not working, the code was wrong. That's it. Then we had the more classical AI, time series AI, you name it. You had your code, your model, and your data. Then you had like 3 variables already, and the code was the most obvious one that could be wrong, but then in data and model, you need to, let's say, iterate and try to experiment and try to measure eval you mentioned before.
Check the vibes, as they say.
Checking the vibes, indeed. But now you're with Gen AI, and you still have your code, but this is fairly simple, if I can be honest, to actually use Gen AI products. You have your data and your model, but they are a bit like behind a closed curtain. But then you have your prompts, you have guardrails, you have a lot of other components which are maybe less technical, used for trust purposes, let's say. What is your take on building trust, gaining trust in such Gen AI applications?
Yeah, so depending on a third party is not new, right? It's I'll take again any of the cloud providers. People didn't trust them in the beginning. Like, why would I run this on their hardware? So how did they gain our trust? Their availability was definitely something that was there. It was more reliable than our internal IT department. So that is doing the same thing. The different thing with the Gen AI is that, will it always give the same answer, right? We have some livers, right? The temperature and making sure the answers are similar. So we kind of are, what we did in CI/CD, we're now doing with the evals to kind of get like the safety net. But if I take the journey of DevOps, where you had, okay, let's make it work, infrastructure as code, now it's like Gen AI, and then we said like CI/CD, evals. Then we had to create like observability to make sure when something was happening in production, and the guardrails, as you were mentioning. And then we found out like, well, wouldn't it be better if we architect for failure? Because then we can deal with the failure, even if we have all the observability and so on. So architecting for that failure, it could be in small ways. It could be the JSON retry. you asking, yeah, we've all been there, right? But if that's built in and that's kind of like a safety net that it's taking care of us. It could also be with agents that we'll be able to replay what an agent does or be able to interfere and give feedback to the agent. But in DevOps, we call that field resilience engineering. And that kind of was looking at the design of our application. And that's kind of a field where we're heading now, where, what if it fails? We have to assume it's going to fail. How do we kind of architect for this? And then the funny part is, in the end, we did chaos engineering. So we induced even more failure because we were not good anymore at dealing with failure. And that's kind of, the path that we're on. And eventually we thought about, let's automate. That's easy. And then there's the whole thing that comes with it to make it more robust. And I think we're on the same trajectory for Gen AI of dealing with this. And yesterday I saw a blog post and it was interesting. They said, 95% is the new 99% uptime. Like the agents work 95% of the time. But then he said, if one agent hands it off to the next agent, and he's also kind of 95%, if you start multiplying, in the end, it doesn't come very good. So we have to deal with the fact that there is like a margin of error. And I haven't seen that fixed, right? There's a will to improve, like every part of the whole chain is improving, from models to RAGs or you name it, everybody's advancing the field. But the ultimate robustness, that doesn't exist on the technology side. So you have to do it with other parts. It could be, as simple as you have documentation that's very good and up to date. That also builds trust. You talk at conferences, you explain what went wrong, how you're improving things. So there's a lot of different ways of, as an external party to kind of gain your trust. Not change the API all of a sudden, right? We've all been there.
Please do not do that. Do not break it.
And it's tough because this is the field where it's like break fast and kind of make sure you get the value. But that's what makes it part of the emerging fields. And that's also where there's a cost. We're right in there.
Definitely. And you mentioned it, and all noses are in the same direction. We need to solve different aspects of the entire ecosystem. A lot of frameworks are arising these days, and you have Microsoft AutoGen, you have the Agent Builder on Google Cloud, you have PhiData, you have Crew AI. I can name 20 others maybe, but if you look through the branding, through what they say, what is for you, let's say, essential in such a framework, what is not needed, where can we find the balance, let's say, and reverting back to the initial topic of the conversation is what we build today will be lost tomorrow, or at least not useful anymore. Same could be said about those frameworks. How should we go with that? What is the right balance for such a framework?
I think most of the, let's say LangChain, Llama Index, they'll be focused on attracting a community. So that means they brought in all the vendors, that put everything they could because it amplifies their brand, right? A lot of the engineers, after, let's say, like 5 or 6 months of using that framework, they say, I can do it myself, in a way that they lose their trust because they break the APIs. It's like thin veneer. We can write a prompt, you don't. But they're great at learning and doing that stuff. What I hope it evolves to is obviously stabilization, and you see some sign of this happening because you understand better the use cases, working there. That there's an ecosystem that comes with the framework, much like Express.js or similar of those language coding frameworks. Is that all of a sudden they have easier debugging? All of a sudden it's easier to write agents. Why do I think, for example, Crew AI took the lead? Because they understood that their DSL of creating it is how the developer actually understands the process. And it's less about creating a React prompt. And no, it's like, okay, I have an agent, I give it an identity. So it's like synthetic sugar and like a DSL, kind of that helps people. Is it the most reliable framework? Probably not, but they say, well, we can play nice with framework A and B and C, and we get kind of an amplification. And that brings it back also to the the previous point, I was like, the lower layers and the layer on top of that, the one who gets the value is the one who kind of uses the lower layer more intelligent. I think the developer experience for Gen AI frameworks is not good. I've seen it over and over again in companies that one of the painful things is the prompt and writing the prompts and rewriting the prompts. In my function as VP engineering, that is a very costly thing to do. If even with a minor semicolon you can break. So that's challenging. And then it's keeping up with the tool set, but that's kind of normal in this area where you have to say like A is better than that. And there's going to be niches, right? DSPY promises to be more on rewriting prompts and taking that pain away. Cryptake is more about bigger data sets and bringing. So you will see them evolve, and obviously Llama Index will be the RAG, and so you kind of are like positions on where their forte is, and then eventually they're all converging to a similar thing they can bring in.
And what is your opinion on such a frameworks? For example, LangChain, we experimented quite a lot already within ML6 as well, is there are hidden prompts in the code, and they have a certain impact on the behavior, let's say, of your tool stack. Is it for you a win to have those prompts within the framework itself, or should it be not that abstracted and smart in a way?
I think if you're doing the abstraction, it needs to work all the time, which is not the case, right? So, and that's why it's so painful for people. They try a RAG pipeline in LangChain, and then they don't understand why their document is not showing up. And that's maybe because the chunking is predefined and so on. So they're not helping the developer in a way that it says like, you need to take care of all these little pieces. But obviously, in the beginning, you don't know all these pieces, so that's normal, right? So, but I think ultimately they learned that they started having callback handlers. They started having like debugging frameworks to kind of make this more visible when it failed. And that's the thin veneer of it's just a prompt, right? So, and that's what makes people uneasy. Like, why am I going with that? But if that pain would have been, I give it a prompt of what I want to do, and it compiles it to a very good prompt, and that like works most of the time, that would be helpful. But right now, they just took an opinionated stance on this is my prompt that we're going to bring in, which was great for learning. I learned a ton just watching the code of those frameworks and learning from it.
It's fun to dive into the dungeons, let's say, of those
Absolutely,
frameworks. Maybe a final question on frameworks and also on the ops side. Within those frameworks, you can opt in for using different models depending on your workflow. But for different models, we know you need different prompts because they do behave a different way. How do you manage your prompts in such a setting from an ops perspective?
There's a trend that says keep it outside of your code. That allows you to treat it as a dependency that you can do A/B testing on in production and faster iterate. And then the other way is I'm just gonna put it as part of my code package, because it's always a combination of it's that version of the model, it's that version of the APIs, that's my logic and that prompt. So it doesn't make sense to ship them and test them in separate items. Like even the A/B testing is tricky because that might be good for a simple chatbot with one prompt and you kind of know exactly what it is. But once you start hooking up more business logic, that brings it back to kind of the code. However, you can use, and I've seen that in a few companies where they actually share the prompts as a code dependency. So similar to the prompt hub, you kind of bring that in. Because if multiple teams are working on the same agents, you bring that into a library, and basically that is what you're doing. But it could be a code library. If you make it more fancy, it's a prompt hub. But the essence is kind of the same of doing that. But you want to have versioning, and that's kind of why we have it like in traditional tooling as well.
All right. Well, I'm absolutely sure that the best prompt will generate the best value. But in terms of value generation, a few statements for you. This or that statements, we could call it. First one, given, and we talked about LLMs, but we went into GenAI agents specifically. We didn't touch a lot about multi-agents frameworks. But let's say agents, build or buy?
If you can afford it, buy.
Okay. If we look into the landscape of who will actually win the race of agents, let's say, you have OpenAI, they have their agent builder. You have all the cloud providers, they have infrastructure plus agent builders now. OpenAI or a big cloud provider?
I would bet on a big cloud provider.
And why?
Because I see that agents go hand in hand with access control, with execution power. You know, already see the evolution, them going into microservices and micro agents. So I think they're the best setup. It might be for a while, and they're just going to buy that. So that's my assumption there. It
might be for a while. Second and third one, this or that. Wait or act now?
I would say act now. Yeah.
And is it valuable enough already for you, or are we in the community stage? Are we in?
Well, you didn't specify what the act was, right? Well, no. The act would be like, explore if you have a value case, and that you would do it through experimentation. And why go through the pain of first building what you need? And that's why I said, buy. Because it will get you faster and closer to the business value eventually. As much as I like to tinker with the technology, right? So let's get clear. But
maybe last one, Patrick, for wrapping up: AGI or superintelligence with agents?
Can I say neither? I don't need both of that. Like, I don't need a self-driving car. I'm already happy with a good cruise control, and that it works most of the time. So I get the aspiration, but I don't see that happen too soon. So maybe I'm that realist, or not yet optimist on that. Who knows?
We'll see about that, Patrick.
Let's do it again.
Thanks a lot for the conversation. I really liked your perspective, and to all of you as well. Today we talked a lot about agents, about GenAI. We have talked about creating value, but also about the investments. And Patrick, we talked about, is it valuable enough? How can we use the frameworks? One thing is sure, agents are here to stay, and I do believe we have quite some work to do as well to prove the value in the upcoming months and weeks.
Let's get on to it.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Patrick.